You've probably walked past someone on the street holding a cardboard sign, and maybe you thought you knew their story. Maybe you judged them by their torn jacket, their tired eyes, or the way their hands shook when they held out a cup. But what if the man sitting on that cold pavement wasn't who you thought? What if the person you looked at as just another homeless man was actually someone who once held the world in awe? That's exactly the story we're diving into today. Before I take you into it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because the stories we share here are the ones most people overlook. The ones that prove life is stranger, more heartbreaking, and more inspiring than fiction. So here's the story of a man who sat on a curb with a sign that read, "Can I fix it for food?" He was laughed at, mocked, brushed off by people who thought they knew better. But behind those tired eyes was a secret that would shake everyone who dared to underestimate him. Because this wasn't just some stranger down on his luck. This was a legend who had once burned rubber on racing tracks across the world, his name whispered in cheers from roaring crowds, his hands steady on the wheel at 200 miles per hour. But now, those same hands were grimy, weathered, and outstretched in desperation for a meal. The story begins on a freezing evening, just as the city lights began to flicker on. The streets were crowded with people rushing home from their jobs, wrapped in coats, holding their coffees, tapping on phones, barely noticing the man sitting by the edge of the hardware store. His sign was written in thick black marker on a piece of cardboard torn from an old box. "Can I fix it for food?" A few people glanced at it. Most ignored it, and some even chuckled as they walked past. "Fix what? He can't even fix himself," a man muttered under his breath to his friend, and they both laughed as if they had said something clever. The homeless man lowered his eyes, not because their words hurt. He had heard worse, but because he knew no amount of explanation could make them see who he once was. For them, he was invisible, or worse, a joke. And yet, not long ago, this same man had been the one everyone looked up to, the one whose name flashed across newspapers, the one sponsors begged to wear their logos, the one little boys pretended to be when they raced bicycles down cracked sidewalks. How could someone go from glory to gutters? That's what no one ever stopped to ask. But tonight, as fate would have it, someone would ask. And that's where everything began to change. The cold air bit through the man's tattered jacket as he shifted his cardboard sign closer to his chest, hoping that maybe just one person would stop, maybe just one would take the words seriously. Hours had passed since he had last eaten, and the hunger gnawed at him in ways only those who have truly starved can understand. But beyond the hunger, there was a deeper pain, the kind that came from being forgotten. Once, every meal had been gourmet, delivered backstage at racing events, plates prepared by chefs in shiny kitchens, champagne glasses filled by assistants, sponsors covering every detail. Now, he was lucky if he found a half-eaten sandwich in the trash behind a diner. Yet even in this lowest point, he clung to a shred of dignity. That's why his sign didn't say, "Please help," or "Spare some change." No, it said, "Can I fix it for food?" because he wanted to offer something back. He wasn't begging for charity. He was offering what he knew best, his hands, his skills, his gift with machines. But the city was a cruel stage that night. A group of young men in shiny jackets spotted him as they walked out of the nearby bar, their laughter loud, their voices careless. They pointed at his sign, and one of them sneered, "Fix it for food? Fix my watch, old man, and I'll give you a fry." The others roared with laughter, tossing crumbs at his feet like he was some stray animal. The homeless man didn't reply. He just stared at the cracked pavement, his jaw tight, his fists clenched under the ragged sleeves of his coat. He had once faced rivals on racetracks that could have killed him in an instant, had once controlled cars at breakneck speeds with the focus of a hawk, and yet here he was, belittled by boys who didn't even know his name. They thought they were powerful because they had full wallets and warm jackets, but they didn't know that the man in front of them had once been the fastest man alive on wheels. He whispered something under his breath, a name, his own, but so softly no one heard. Because what was the point of telling anyone? Who would believe that the man huddled against the cold tonight had once been cheered by millions? Just then, a different figure approached. She was a woman in her late 30s, carrying groceries in both hands, her scarf wrapped tight against the wind. Unlike the others, she didn't laugh when she saw the sign. She paused. Something about the wording caught her attention. "Can I fix it for food?" She stopped and asked, almost without thinking. "Fix what?" Her voice wasn't mocking, just curious. The man lifted his eyes for the first time that night. They were sharp, tired, but not broken. He said simply, "Anything with an engine." The woman tilted her head, studying him closer. There was something in the way he said it. No hesitation, no doubt, like someone speaking from muscle memory, from years of mastery. "You mean like cars?" she asked, shifting the bag at her arm. He nodded once. "Cars, bikes, anything that runs." She smiled faintly, almost apologetically. "Well, my car won't even start half the time. It's parked just around the corner." "If you're serious." Her voice trailed off, as if she half expected him to refuse. But he pushed himself to his feet, his knees stiff from the cold sidewalk, and said, "Show me." As they walked, the young men who had mocked him earlier shouted after them, "Careful, lady. He might steal your tires." But she ignored them, and so did he. Inside, though, something was stirring. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of purpose, a reminder of who he used to be. His fingers flexed, as if already gripping tools, already turning bolts. The woman led him to an old sedan parked on the side of the street. "It's been giving me trouble for weeks," she explained, unlocking the door. "The mechanic said it's too far gone, but I can't afford another one." The homeless man crouched down, listening carefully as the engine coughed and sputtered when she turned the key. He closed his eyes, letting the sound sink in. He had always had a gift. He could hear engines the way a musician hears notes, each vibration telling him a story. "I know what's wrong," he murmured. She blinked at him. "Already? You haven't even opened the hood." He only gave her the faintest smile, the kind of smile a master gives when he knows a secret no one else does. And so, with bare hands and no tools, he began to work. His fingers, though cracked and stiff with cold, moved with a precision that startled the woman. He asked her to pop the hood, and as the latch clicked, he leaned over the engine like a man reuniting with an old friend. The city noises blurred in the background, the chatter of passers-by, the honking of traffic, even the drunken laughter of the young men who had mocked him earlier, all faded as he listened, touched, and studied the heart of the machine. He didn't need shiny tools or a workshop. He had his instincts, his ears, his hands, and decades of experience embedded deep into his bones. With nothing but a rusted wrench he'd borrowed from the trunk, he adjusted connections, tightened loose fittings, and rechecked wires. Then he stepped back, motioned for her to try again. She turned the key, and this time the car didn't cough. It roared to life, smooth, steady, as if it had been waiting for his touch. Her eyes widened in shock. "I've taken this to 3 different mechanics," she whispered. "None of them could fix it. How'd you?" He shrugged. "Engines talk, if you know how to listen." For the first time in a long time, he saw gratitude in someone's eyes instead of pity or contempt. She reached into her bag and handed him a container of food. "Please take this. I was going to have dinner at home, but you need it more than I do." His pride fought against his hunger, but eventually he accepted. He ate quietly, savoring every bite, while she leaned against the car, studying him. "You don't sound like just some guy who tinkers with cars," she said finally. "Who are you?" He looked down at the half-empty container, unsure whether to answer. To admit who he had once been felt almost laughable now. The world wouldn't connect the name of a racing champion to the man sitting in filth by the sidewalk. "Just someone who used to drive," he muttered. She frowned. "Drive? Like a cab?" He hesitated, then chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "Something like that." But fate, as it often does, wasn't done with him yet. As he returned to his corner later that night, sign clutched under his arm, an expensive car pulled up across the street. Out stepped a tall man in a tailored coat, holding keys that gleamed under the lamplight. He was clearly wealthy, shiny shoes, gold watch, the kind of man who looked like he belonged to charity galas, not in dark alleys. His sleek sports car, however, sputtered and smoked as soon as he tried to start it. He cursed under his breath, slammed the door, and kicked the tire in frustration. The homeless man watched silently, debating whether to say something. Then, almost against his own will, he called out, "I can fix that." The wealthy man turned, narrowed his eyes, and laughed. "You? You don't even have a roof over your head." What do you know about cars like this? The homeless man simply held up his sign. Can I fix it for food? He repeated. The rich man smirked. All right, old-timer. Impress me. If you can get this thing running, I'll buy you the fanciest dinner in town. But if you're wasting my time, don't even think about coming near me again. With quiet confidence, he walked over. The sports car's engine was far more complicated than the old sedan he had fixed earlier, but his eyes lit up the moment he opened the hood. He knew this design. He had not only driven cars like this, he had helped test them, had pushed them to their limits on international circuits. He brushed his hand across the engine block like one might touch a relic from their youth. The wealthy man crossed his arms, clearly expecting him to fail. Minutes ticked by as the homeless man worked methodically, checking connections, recalibrating, making adjustments by feel alone. Then, with one final twist, he gestured for the man to start it. The engine came alive instantly, smoother than it had sounded in months. The rich man's jaw dropped. What the hell? Who are you? He demanded. And this time, the homeless man said a name. His real name. The name that once filled headlines. The name that had been engraved on trophies. The name shouted in packed stadiums. And the wealthy man froze. Because he recognized it instantly. The laughter, the arrogance, all vanished. The rich man whispered, almost in disbelief, You're that racing legend. You disappeared years ago. Everyone thought you were dead. The homeless man gave a small, tired nod. Might as well have been, he said softly. But that night, under the cold glow of the street lamps, with a sports car purring like a contented beast beside him, the truth of who he was began to spread again. And soon, the people who had mocked him would learn exactly how wrong they had been. The name hung in the air like electricity, and for a moment the street itself seemed to pause. That wealthy man, who only moments earlier had mocked the homeless stranger, stared in stunned silence, struggling to reconcile the ragged figure before him with the photographs etched in his memory. He remembered watching races years ago, remembered the thunder of engines, the blur of speed, and the voice of the commentator screaming that name with reverence as the checkered flag waved. The man in front of him wasn't just anyone. He was once a champion, a record setter, a symbol of daring, precision, and unshakable will. And yet here he was shivering in the cold, eating leftovers, carrying a cardboard sign for dignity. The wealthy man stammered, "But how? How did you end up like this?" The legend's eyes grew distant, heavy with memories that pressed against his chest like weights he had carried for too long. It wasn't one thing, he murmured, it was everything. And then, almost against his will, the story spilled out. He had started young, just a boy with grease-stained hands in his father's garage. Engines fascinated him more than anything else, and he had a gift, not just for repairing them, but for understanding them, listening to them like voices no one else could hear. By the time he was a teenager, he was racing illegally on back roads, his skill undeniable. Scouts noticed him, teams began to circle, and soon he was living the dream every racer imagines. Roaring crowds, sponsors fighting to attach their names to his car, international fame. He wasn't just a driver. He was a phenomenon, the kind of athlete people thought would never fall. But fame is a fragile crown. Behind the cheers were contracts, greed, politics, and expectations that no human could carry forever. He pushed harder, drove faster, risked everything. And then one night, during a championship race, everything changed. The track was slick with rain, visibility near zero, but he refused to slow down. He wanted to prove himself, to silence critics who said he had peaked. His car spun out at impossible speed, flipping, crashing, bursting into flames. He survived, but barely. His body was broken, his career in pieces, and worse, the media devoured the story. They called him reckless, washed up, irresponsible. Sponsors abandoned him. Teams cut ties. Friends disappeared. And in the background, medical bills piled up. He tried to fight back, tried to return, but the injuries slowed him, and the world had already moved on to newer, younger racers. Soon, the man who had once been adored by millions couldn't even get a job tuning engines. Then came the spiral. One bad investment, betrayal by someone he trusted with his money, debts he couldn't pay. Piece by piece, the empire crumbled, And when he finally looked up, he was alone, broke and forgotten. The wealthy man, listening, shook his head, struggling to absorb it. To him, this was like seeing a king stripped of his crown, walking among beggars. He asked softly, "And no one helped you?" The legend gave a bitter laugh. People cheer when you're on top, but when you fall, they look away. Nobody wants to be reminded how quickly the mighty can crumble. His voice cracked, but he steadied it. That's why I wrote the sign. I didn't want to beg. I wanted to remind myself I still had something to offer. Engines, they never left me. They still speak to me, even when people don't. The silence that followed was heavy. The rich man, whose own car now purred perfectly because of this homeless legend, cleared his throat. "You shouldn't be out here," he said finally. "The world needs to hear your story again. They need to remember who you are." But the legend only shrugged. They already forgot. What neither of them knew, however, was that the small encounter that night was only the beginning. Because the woman with the groceries, the one whose car he had fixed earlier, had filmed part of it on her phone. Not to exploit him, but because she couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Later, she would post it online with a caption that read, "The homeless man who fixed my car turned out to be a racing legend." And within days, the world that had once abandoned him would come searching again. The video spread faster than anyone could have imagined. At first, it was just a handful of shares, neighbors passing it around, racing fans double-checking the name in disbelief. But within hours, it caught fire across social media. Headlines began popping up. "Homeless man who fixed strangers' cars identified as former racing champion." Sports pages that had once celebrated his victories now dusted off old photographs and replayed footage of his legendary wins. Clips of him flying across finish lines, raising trophies, and smiling under champagne showers resurfaced, alongside the raw footage of him now, bearded, broken, clutching a cardboard sign. The contrast was jarring, heartbreaking, impossible to ignore. People who had once screamed his name in crowded stadiums admitted online that they hadn't even realized he'd disappeared. Comment sections flooded with shock, with shame, with admiration. "How did we let this happen? I grew up idolizing this man. He was my hero." This proves you never really know someone's story. Suddenly, strangers were searching for him in the city streets. Fans holding up old posters, journalists scrambling to confirm details. Racing forums lit up, with older members retelling stories of his glory days, of the races where he defied physics, of the records he set that still hadn't been broken. Sponsors who had abandoned him years ago now reached out again, hoping to attach their logos to his name once more, not out of charity, but because the world was watching. But when cameras finally found him, huddled near the same hardware store with his cardboard sign, he didn't play along for attention. He was cautious, guarded, even resistant. Fame had burned him once, and he wasn't eager to step back into its flames. Yet there was one thing he couldn't ignore. People weren't laughing anymore. They weren't mocking him, weren't stepping over him. They were listening. For the first time in years, they were truly listening. An invitation came from a racing organization. Not to compete. His body was no longer able to endure the brutal forces of professional driving, but to mentor, to coach young drivers, to lend his expertise. At first, he hesitated. He thought, why would anyone want to learn from me? But then he remembered the boy he had once been, tinkering with engines in a garage, desperate for someone to believe in him. And so he accepted. On his first day back at the track, reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, and fans cheered. Not the roar of tens of thousands like before, but still enough to remind him that his name had never fully died. He walked onto the track slowly, leaning slightly from old injuries, but his eyes lit up as he smelled the gasoline, heard the engines rev, felt the vibrations under his feet. He wasn't driving, but he was home. The young drivers he mentored were in awe. At first, they didn't believe the stories, that this man had once taken corners at impossible speeds, that he had rivalries etched into racing history. But when he spoke, they understood. He taught them things no book or simulator could teach. How to listen to an engine, how to feel the car as an extension of their own body, how to respect the machine as if it were alive. Under his guidance, rookies began to rise, setting times that stunned even seasoned veterans. One driver, trembling with gratitude, told him, "You gave me a chance no one else would. You're not just a legend, you're a lifeline." Those words broke something in him in the best way. For years he had believed he was forgotten, worthless, discarded like a broken part. But here he was, shaping the future of the sport he once ruled. And life, as if making amends, began to stitch itself back together. The woman who had given him food became a friend, then family, helping him stabilize, find housing, rebuild piece by piece. The wealthy man whose sports car he had fixed offered him opportunities to consult on luxury vehicles, tapping into his unparalleled knowledge of engines. Slowly, his dignity returned. He no longer needed a cardboard sign. His hands, his skill, his story were enough. And though he would never again feel the rush of crossing a finish line at 200 miles per hour, he realized he didn't need to. His victory wasn't in trophies anymore. It was in survival, in resilience, in the ability to rise from fall that should have ended him. When asked in an interview what message he wanted to share, he paused, then looked straight into the camera. His voice was steady, full of weight. Never assume you know someone's story just by looking at them. You might be passing a champion, a fighter, a survivor. And never, never mock a man who's down. Because sometimes the man on the curb was once the man who owned the world. The clip went viral, and people all over the world repeated his words. He had become, once again, a symbol, not of speed, but of strength. And so, the man once mocked for holding a sign that said, "Can I fix it for food?" was no longer hungry, no longer forgotten, no longer invisible. He was remembered, honored, and respected, not just as a racing legend, but as proof that even when life breaks you, the engine inside you can roar again.